Today, we have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Drew Glover, fundraising coach here at Bonterra. Drew is a skilled fundraising strategist and coach dedicated to elevating nonprofit organizations through tailored fundraising, engagement, and donor stewardship strategies. Based in Selma, Alabama, and originally from Santa Cruz, he brings a wealth of experience in nonprofit operations, conscious team management, and community building, making him a sought-after resource for organizations of all sizes aiming to maximize their impact. His career now is underscored by a commitment to supporting the strategy success of nonprofit organizations while ultimately developing strong and cohesive teams. So we are in for a treat. We are in for a wealth of knowledge. So buckle in, folks. But with that, Drew, I will go ahead and pass it to you to get us really kicked off here.
Thank you, Ashley, and hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm glad that you're all here, whether you're joining live and being able to interact with us today, or you're watching that recording that Ashley was talking about. I want to thank you for being here to carve out some time and invest in something that, I mean, let's be honest, is both deeply personal, but also absolutely necessary, which is building lasting, meaningful relationships with people who help make our missions possible. So as for this wonderful introduction, my name is Drew Glover, a fundraising coach, professional strategist, all those titles. A little bit about me, I've been in the space for over 10 years doing work with nonprofits around development and strategic planning. You know, there's the number of how much money and all that stuff I've raised, which is cool. And I should probably actually update the slide and my headshot. As you can tell, it's been a while since I've gotten the new headshot. So one of those. But one of the things that I focus on predominantly are the 3 pillars of fundraising, which I talked about in my last webinar that I gave. If you didn't get a chance, go back and check that out. It's relationships, visibility, and data, and how those all come together to help you develop what are called transformational relationships. We really want to focus on that and raise the possibility of what we can do and raise connection so that we can make that transformation happen. Last time I was here, like Ashley said, there was some really amazing feedback from folks that participated, wanted to know more. And so I want to just express my gratitude to those folks that appreciated it, and also acknowledge that you're wanting more because you want to get better and improve at fundraising, which is always really exciting and means that you'll be able to do more good out in the world. Because it's not just about money, it's about trust, storytelling, and a shared vision with your donors. So let's keep that momentum going, and we can talk a little bit about what you're going to be learning today, and hopefully leave the session with today as we move through all of it. So we're going to be talking about mapping the donor journey and what that looks like. You may have heard other terms like pipeline, experience, path. We're going to use the word journey today, and also acknowledge all of the nuances and complexity that goes into that and that it deserves. We'll also talk about donor engagement and how you can engage in that without it feeling robotic, but real, because that's the ultimate goal, is to make it so that you're having authentic and unique interactions with folks. We'll explore how to activate your whole team, even those folks on your team that say, I don't do fundraising, and figuring out how we can engage them, because everyone has a role in creating the culture of generosity at the organization. And then we'll zoom out and we'll start talking more about those transformational relationships, the kind that deepen year after year, not just during the annual appeal. So you're staying in communication with them. And finally, understanding how measurement works and why measuring matters, so that you can do more of what works and less of what doesn't. So before we do that, though, I want to take a second and let's get grounded. I really enjoyed this picture because it's like, wait, he's not on the ground. But we often move through meetings. The reason why I do this in the beginning of this session, especially because we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, is in the nonprofit world, executive world, all that stuff, we're usually moving from meeting to meeting, task to task. And even in spaces like this, where we want to be present and be able to focus on what we're talking about, it can also just feel like another kind of thing on our calendar that we're engaging to. So I want to invite you really quick. It'll take maybe 2 minutes for us to do something a little different. It's small, but I think it's really powerful, and that's taking a breath together. So if you're able to and feel comfortable, if you'll close your eyes with me for a second, or just gently soften your gaze. If you can, put your feet flat on the floor so that you feel centered. And if you feel like it, put one hand on your chest over your heart space and just take a second and feel that. You are here. And now join me in taking a deep breath in all the way. And then slowly exhale it out. One more time in. And out, let your shoulders drop a little. Do a head roll if you need to loosen up the neck. I don't know about you, I get a little tingle every time I do that. But I really want to emphasize this moment is for you, your vision, the communities that you serve, and the relationships that you're building, because those relationships are what make everything possible. And I really want us to ground in this, which is the idea and a quick intention that you don't need to be a perfect fundraiser to be able to build lasting relationships. You just need to show up with care, clarity, and a willingness to learn to be able to engage. And today is not about a one size fits all template, because we all know every organization is different and everything that you're doing is unique. But it's about the tools that'll help you approach things in a more intentional, resonant, and really aligned way for the people that you serve. So let's jump into it. First thing, building the donor journey. We talk about fundraising, and it all really begins with creating a really solid journey or experience to invite your donors in. It's also important to realize that the donor journey isn't linear. It's a curving, winding path that will make it so that you have to flex and move. It's not a clear funnel. It's not always a bunch of tidy boxes. And it's like a relationship where it ebbs and flows. There's moment of engagement where you're really engaged, and there's also moments of intentional distance when you're not necessarily talking to someone as much as you did previously. And that's okay. What matters is that we show up with intention on each step. So let's break it down as we talk about mapping the donor pathways on this journey. Now, there are 4 types of donors that people normally focus on when they're doing it. I intentionally left out recurring donors because those kind of fit into some of these different areas. But we have these 4 specific areas. New donors, which are folks that have given for the first time. They're really curious. They're testing the waters. They need a warm welcome and a sense of belonging because they're new to what's going on. It's a solid welcome series and engagement with these folks that really matter on how you engage with them. Lapsed donors are folks that have given in the past, but haven't really done it recently. So it's important not to write them off, because even though they haven't given recently, that doesn't mean that they don't want to still be engaged. And often all it takes is a personal message or a compelling story or some kind of engagement campaign that'll bring them back again, especially to acknowledge the pause without guilt, right? So we don't want to be like, you haven't given in a while, where's your money? As opposed to, hey, wanted to check in and fill you in on some stuff that we're doing. Returning donors are folks who have given more than once, even if it's irregularly. And this is a chance to really focus on them as being interested and move them from being interested to being invested. It's an opportunity to deepen the connections with folks, invite them behind the scenes, share a story, reflect on the impact, ask for their input. And then you have major donors, which are high capacity givers, people that give you large sums of money every year and who are often seeking alignment between their values and the vision of the organization. With them, you really want to focus on relationship building because that's everything that's associated with it. And that really means things like maybe one-on-one stewardship, personalized updates, invitations. We'll talk more about that in general. And I know that some of you on the call, depending on the size of your organization or where you are in your fundraising journey, might be like, hey, wait a minute, I don't have any major donors. And what I would say to you with that is that you probably do have major donors. You just might not have cultivated them yet. And so that's what we're going to work on today, is figuring out how we're going to do that. To begin, we can talk about a donor stewardship matrix. If you don't have one, highly recommend that you develop one. You can find templates of it online, and I'll have one example to show you in just a second. But this is a tool that brings clarity and consistency to your team's donor engagement. It really makes it so you can ask some key questions like, who are we engaging? How are we engaging them? When are we engaging them? And who on the team is responsible for them? So an example of that is first-time donors, for example, for people who give you under $100. How are you responding to them? Are you sending them a personal thank you email within 48 hours? Is it a postcard that you follow up with 2 weeks later to keep them involved and let them know that you're engaging in different ways? Is it monthly givers and how you might send them quarterly updates or annual appreciation letters that are signed by your executive director? Or then major gifts, and you might want to plan out like very intentional, personalized touch points with them throughout the year, whether that's like calls or in-person visits, sending them impact reports and stuff like that. What matters is not really how complex your matrix is, but it's more about that it's shared across the team so everyone knows how to show up for donors that's both timely and meaningful. And so this is a visual example of what could be a donor matrix or a stewardship matrix. And you can see here, this is one I made for a client that I work with. And it really kind of breaks down the actions and the different ways of stewardship that's happening, the activities that are associated with those categories, and then the time associated with that you want to be implementing it. You can assign your team on who's going to be responsible for what, and then you can alter what action gets taken on what step with what level. Like maybe you want to treat your first time donors differently than this organization does, but you can go and you can mark that and then assign those to the people that are most relevant for what's going on. So now let's move from the stewardship matrix into your CRM, whether you're using Network for Good or Every Action or one of the different Bonterra tools to be able to organize CRM, customer relations management software, right? Database, whatever word you want to use for it. But it's really how you're going to be able to start to personalize the journey for folks. Segmentation is going to be your best friend here. What does that mean? Separating people based on some of their different categories or things that are associated with them. And it doesn't really have to be overwhelming. You can really segment it by giving behavior for the first time, recurring, major, like figuring out how you want to engage with those folks, how they're engaging with the organization, whether that they were an event attendee, a volunteer, an advocate. You can always do surveys, which is really great. I love doing those through the Bonterra system to be able to understand what people are interested in. You could also add that as an additional question when people are donating so that you can understand why they're giving and how they're giving. And then also understanding their communication preferences. Like, how do they want to get, because if I hate text messages and you're sending me text messages, I'm unsubscribing from that list and you're not going to be able to get to me. But if I really enjoy emails and you know that I've marked that as my preferred way of engagement, following through with that is a really great way to do that. And so using the tags and groups can really send a message to the donor also that, like, I know what you like and I know what you need. I'm paying attention to what you're doing and I'm paying attention to what happens. And that focus builds trust, loyalty, and a sense of connection, which is what we're going to talk about more with the transformational relationships. But ultimately, a lot of this is going to come down to trust, because this is a great quote that I always talk to people about, is that people don't fund organizations. They fund people that they trust. Like, I could walk down the street asking for money. You're not going to give it to me. But if your friend is walking next to me and tells you how amazing my job is and what I'm doing and the impact I'm having and asks you to give me $5, you're probably way more likely to give me $5 because of that extra level of trust. And so that's something that we're going to be working throughout the donorship journey, the donor stewardship journey. So let's talk about communications and what that looks like. And if you have questions, remember, put it in the Q&A so we can answer it at the end, because I'm sure there's a lot of stuff coming up for folks that you might want some additional stuff on. So please use that Q&A section. So comms. Ideally, we're going to create a system where you can set it and kind of forget it. Not all the way, of course, because we want to be really engaged with comms, but it's definitely one of the most powerful tools that you can build for yourself. And because it creates a series of automated touch points that go without you having to manually send them. And especially if you're using things like Every Action with Bonterra, it is an amazing automation system to where you can have full-on experiences that are sent out automatically through automated services. But the idea here is creating a baseline of consistent communication. I always talk about, what's your cadence of communication with your donors? How frequently are you engaging with them, for especially the new and mid-level donors? But we also don't want to leave out the good old major gifts. So what does that look like? So here's a quick example of what it would look like for someone that's new coming into the organization. Maybe they make the donation, and immediately after the donation, they get the automated, personalized thank you letter with an impact snapshot about what they're doing. Then 5 days later, it sends out another that has a short story or a highlight about the work that's going on with their donation. Another 5 days later, they get another email about messages from a program staff or community member, or a testimony. And then 21 days out, maybe an invitation to come and engage, or to follow you on social media, or to participate, or maybe even to upgrade into a monthly donor. Because by then, they'll have seen, like, okay, not only did I give, but these people are doing some work. Like, they're making some change happen. Why not change my $5 gift to $5 a month? Like, that's totally doable for me. And then building that out to build that up into more. That's less than a month of messages, but it builds a real momentum of being able to talk to people. And so I want to just share this pro tip especially around communications, is to really make sure you're reviewing and refreshing your content regularly. So like, what does it look like? What have you been putting out? Is there new stuff you can put out, especially in your automated systems? Like you don't want to be sending the same success story 6 years in a row. Is there a new story you can put out? Is there a new testimony you can grab? Maybe testing, A/B testing. Some people don't know what that means. A/B testing is where you're putting out the same content, but in different formats or with different language, but it's the same topics, and then seeing which one does better based on the language that you're using, based on the design of the email, understanding what people respond to the most. And if you're using automations, it can also save you a lot of time because you can take that time that you would normally be manually sending out these different things and reinvest it in developing the relationship with the individuals. So just a quick reminder, we always want to have these reminders throughout the presentation. Fundraising is not about moving people through a pipeline. And that's why I use the word journey, right? It's about accompanying them through the relationship. Because like all relationships, they require intentional care and a little creativity to be able to figure out how best to do it. So even with automations, you want to make sure that you're focusing on creating that experience. Now, since we're talking about comms, let's shift into understanding multi-channel outreach and what that looks like. Now, good news, you're probably already using multi-channel outreach, sending emails, posting on social media, texting, and emailing. Now, the real opportunity and the question I want to ask us is, where do you go from here? You go from doing a little bit of everything, kind of without intention, just kind of putting it everywhere, or starting to really focus about not just checking boxes of I did that social media post, but understanding like, is this the best way to be consistent and creative across all of the different donor channels? So one great way to think about it is to say the same thing everywhere, but not in the same way. And to think about what that looks like, you want to be thinking about how you optimize the conversation or the content on each one of the channels that you have. So for emails, for example, you can use that opportunity to go a little deeper. You can tell a fuller story. You can use formatting like headers and bullet points, calls to action. And with emails, especially if you have a lot of content, because too much content can be overwhelming, consider using blogs so that you can post a blog on your website, create a short synopsis in your newsletter with a image and a link, and then have people click on that, which will not only be an activated conversion of an action through your newsletter, but it'll drive them to your website where they can learn more about what's going on and make a donation. Because in that blog, there's probably going to be if you like what you're reading here, make a donation to the organization. Social media, those are visual things. Now, email is visual too, but especially social media, because you want to catch people's attention like that. Everyone, has what? You have 2 seconds to capture someone's attention while they're scrolling to have them stop and look at your post. So what does that look like? Using photos, videos, short-term or short-form video stuff in stories. What do the captions look like? It can be emotional. It can be really quick. And then also using those calls to action with sharing, commenting, tagging a friend, which doesn't require them to donate, but helps to spread the message. Text messages, always want to keep it short, nothing super long. And then also incorporating a link or a URL that you can have in there. And then direct mail, which is usually where you can really get into storytelling and do personal touches. You can send materials that people can touch and feel. And also doing heartfelt handwritten things to be able to engage folks in the direct mail element. Now, not everyone's going to be doing direct mail because that's rather expensive. But if you are doing direct mail, it's a great way to engage. The key is being creative with the format, even if the message is consistent, to increase the odds of engaging the donors where they are and really touching their hearts and having them act on it. Oh yeah, forgot to change the slide. So next, ROI, return on investment. Now, a lot of people think of donations as just gifts, right? Which is totally good. But also we want to see them as investments in your organization, because it's people that believe in what you're doing and want to put their money to be able to support you in accomplishing the mission. And so we really want to focus on gifts and how they make an impact and why it matters. So for example, how are you saying that to folks? Are you just saying thank you for your $10 donation? Or are you breaking it down so they can see the tangible impact of the funds and how those make an impact in your organization, whether it's number of people you serve, whether it's number of meals you provided, whether the number of socks you bought, trees you planted, like all these different things that make it so that people feel that they're making an impact. And this is where data can meet stories, because numbers validate the scale of everything, but stories make it human. And so we really want to make it so that as you're communicating the numbers, you're also finding ways to reinforce that with emotional, thought-provoking content to really make it a transformative experience for the donor. We'll talk more now about automation and how you can automate with intention so that you're not just shifting to automations as kind of like a way to not have to do the work anymore, right? These are some things you can do AI stuff. Using ChatGPT, for example, a great way. I don't know how people feel about AI on this call. I know we have a lot of us have a spectrum of emotions around it, but it is a great tool if you need to have a small team or you need to do things to save yourself some time. So really easy donor thank you models. You can do segments across messaging. You can summarize long stories into short posts. Something I really enjoy doing, especially with like long articles. You can get the whole long and get it down into 3 or 4 sentences. But then also, depending on the different CRM that you're using with Bonterra, and also with the different AI, like for example, if you're using ChatGPT, you can predict the likelihood of people giving and their actions. So, for example, if you don't have a CRM that has that ability, taking their donor history, the things they're interested in, the times that they've engaged with you, and maybe some other elements of things you know about them, feeding that into AI and saying, hey, what would be a great way to help encourage this person to give, and see what it comes back with. And that might, even if you don't use the ideas, a lot of people use AI as idea generators. So it'll inspire you to go in a direction to be able to make things happen. You can also use automations to trigger thank yous, like we talked about before, send birthday messages or to longtime donors. You can do pre-written materials to be able to send out things to lapsed donors. So it's a really effective tool, but the key is do not let it replace the relationship. Use it to create space for the relationship, because the goal is to be more human and to have more human connection. So we're going to use technology to save us time so that we can then take that time and reinvest it in people, which is the ultimate goal. So we talked about that. And now storytelling, because I've mentioned stories a few times in all of this. So what does that mean? Well, storytelling, and I want you to embrace this, storytelling is your power. It's what's going to get people through the door, and the data might seal the deal, but the story is what people will remember. Because if I tell you, oh, we sent 20 kids to summer camp, that's exciting. Great, 20 kids to summer camp. But if I tell you the story of Sean, who went to summer camp and was dealing with this issue before they went to summer camp, and then through summer camp, they engaged in our programs and made this piece of artwork with this picture. Check out this. And then here's the group picture of everyone at the camp. And now Sean has increased his ability to do X, right? Fill in the blank. Then I'm like, wow, that's so cool. What a great story, Sean. Look at the drawings and the kids, and it's so great. And so it creates that connection. So a few story formats that you can rotate through. The one person story. So like I mentioned with Sean, how it changed their life. The community voice. So lifting up donors, volunteers, and partners, why they're partnering with you, why they're giving to you. The future vision of the organization. So where we can go together if we're working on the shared vision. And then behind the scenes. So who's doing the work? Pull back the curtain. Don't just share the wins, but share the whys, the hows, and the what's next. So like if you're doing multi-channel outreach, you want to be thinking about how you can retell the story in lots of formats. So for example, a full-length email, a 90-second Instagram reel, a text. So what does that look like with getting your story out there to be able to engage? Now, before we leave this conversation of communications and storytelling, I just want to leave you with this simple prompt, is that when you're looking at what you're doing, what channels can you deepen next? Not necessarily add if you're already doing multi-channel outreach, but looking at what you're doing right now. What are ways that you can go from good enough to excellence, which is the ultimate goal that we're trying to do with all of this. It's not about doing more necessarily. It's about getting better with what you're already doing. And that's what a lot of this really boils down to, is understanding what's going on. Now, that might be a lot for one person. In fact, I know it's a lot for one person because I've been in that position where it's just me doing all the work. But what's important is understanding how to engage your team in fundraising, because it's totally possible. Totally possible. A lot of times across nonprofits, we hear a lot of people say, how do I get my team more involved in fundraising? I actually go and do presentations for boards to get them more involved in fundraising, to help them understand what's going on. And so even if you're a dedicated fundraising person, even if you're full of events and all kinds of activities, it can still feel like crushing weight for one or two people. And if you're on this call and not the fundraiser and someone that's supporting the fundraiser, know that it's really difficult for one person sometimes. So how do we shift that? And the way that we can do that is by making sure we understand that fundraising is not a job title. It's a mindset and a culture within the organization of how it moves the organization on what you do and how you focus on development. Now, the question that I hear a lot is, can I engage my board in fundraising? The short, yes, you can engage your board in fundraising. In fact, many board members aren't afraid of fundraising. They're totally down to it, but they either aren't being asked, or they don't like to do it wrong, or don't want to feel pushy, feel unprepared, or ask people for money that feels awkward or in a way that feels forced. And so we ask ourselves, how do we engage people meaningfully in the work while still offering them the opportunity to engage? And so we can shift the frame. So instead of asking people for money, we can ask people to engage in the impact or how to participate in the impact. That one mindset can change someone's engagement. But also giving them tools to be able to engage. A lot of times what I work with clients is creating the packets for the boards. It's basically a toolkit for them to be able to plug into with pre-generated emails, pre-generated stories, pre-generated social media texts, pre-generated images. All they got to do is go in, grab it, copy it, post it, send it. Super easy, fast. You can even do it during board meetings. We're like, hey, everyone, remember that email I sent you before the board meeting? Well, let's go into our phones right now and send a quick social media message and then engage with that. Other ways you can do that too is creating clear roles. So not everyone has to make the ask. I always emphasize that as well. If you don't like asking for money, don't ask for money. How are you making introductions? Can you host an event? Can you say a thank you? Or what are some different ways that you can bring prospects into the organization that might give where I can ask them to make a contribution? There's also establishing a fundraising committee that'll help you work in between the board meetings, and then remembering to make it personal with the board, specifically, like, why are you here? Like, what makes you excited? And then have them focus on that element of the organization for fundraising and engagement. So what's really important to remember is to celebrate small wins, though, because you don't want to have them do something and be like, "Brook," and then disappear. Even if you have them send out that social media post, come back at the next board meeting and uplift the statistics around that post that they all shared and show the impact that they made to celebrate them. I also want to emphasize that you probably have a bigger team than you think. So we can zoom out from the board and start to look at the rest of the team. Maybe you have a volunteer coordinator, maybe you've got a comms person, maybe you've got an event lead, maybe even program staff and community liaisons that want to engage or are part of your organization. Well, guess what? They are all part of your fundraising ecosystem. And so you can begin to engage them without feeling overwhelmed. Volunteer coordinators, invite them to collect and share stories of volunteers while they're engaging with volunteers. So you have a data bank of volunteer success or celebration stories, connecting with different volunteer opportunities, events managers, making sure that they're building fundraising into every element of the event. Right? Every event you have, there should be some element of fundraising or friend raising. Even maybe it's not raising money. Maybe it's getting signed up for your newsletter so you can join them in the journey. There's also for the comms person doing that messaging, the storytelling that we talked about, and then program staff is letting them be the storytellers. So having them share stories about their experiences working on the front lines with the community, or sharing their experiences and why they're working with the organization. The key is to make people feel connected to the mission, ultimately. Another thing to remember is the goal is not to give everyone a second job, right? Because people are going to be like, oh, that's not my job description. The key is to activate their role as storytellers, connectors, and relationship builders so that they're supporting what you're doing. And ultimately, creating a culture of abundance. So at the heart of everything that we're doing, and the coaching that I do especially, we really want to shift the culture in our organization, if it exists, from scarcity to abundance. There's always the fear, there's not enough money, there's not enough time, there's not enough staff power, there's not enough people, all these thoughts. What I really encourage you to shift when you have those thoughts is to acknowledge them. Don't push them out of your mind. Acknowledge that they're there, but then as a conscious leader, make a shift in your mind intentionally to not let that stop you. I was telling someone earlier today, the idea of courage is not the absence of fear, it's the refusal to stop fear from keep you from trying, right? And so it's the same thing with this idea is the money's out there. There's bajillions of dollars out there that are just waiting for you. The key is for you to find them and get them into your hands. And so what does that mean? To create that culture, sharing wins across the departments, not just in the development department. We're getting out of our silos, right? Tell programs how amazing you did on this last fundraiser because of the help that they did with all the other kinds of stuff. Talk about fundraisers in every team meeting, not just the year-end meeting. How are we doing on fundraising? What's the plan for this week's fundraiser? Treating donors as a part of the community, not just a funding source. How are you inviting them in to engage? Because I guarantee you, if someone feels connected to your organization, they're going to find ways to support you. And maybe that's introducing you to someone with more money. And then celebrating the impact of giving, not just the size of the gift. So as your whole team kind of starts to engage, you're going to have this pitch-in mentality and starting to build a movement that's aligned and grounded with your goals. A prompt I want us to think about with this culture of abundance is what's one small specific way you can invite your team to engage in fundraising this month, but not as a guilt trip, as an open door, not I'm doing all this work, you don't do anything, I need you to do stuff in fundraising, right? That's not going to do it. But it's like, look at all these great opportunities and look at where we're going. I'd love to talk with you about ways that we can incorporate you into some of the work that we're doing with fundraising. And there are some examples, write a thank you note, spotlight them as a person, reach out to a donor for feedback. So there's a lot of different options, but what's key is that small shifts over time change culture. And so we really want to focus on that to make things happen. Now we're going to transition into the section that I told you we're going to talk more about, which is transformational fundraising and stewardship. And I think probably the first question that you're going to ask me is, what does that even mean, right? Because like, what is a transformational relationship and what is the difference? And so there's a difference between a transactional relationship, which I think is what a lot of people are used to. And then there's a transformational relationship, which some organizations do really, really well. And the difference is transactional relationships, I ask you for money, you give me the money, I'll see you next time. That's it. You might get like a thank you email that's automated, but for the most part, that's the last that we really talk to you. A transformational relationship takes the stance of let's walk together through this process, build something meaningful, stay connected. And because we both believe in the future we're trying to create, let's join forces and make it so that we can make this thing happen together. I want to emphasize that transformational fundraising is rooted in relationship, story, and shared impact. And it's not a luxury. It's really a necessity, especially if you want donors to stick around, level up, and feel more like partners instead of ATMs, because no one really likes feeling like an ATM. I mean, unless you're an ATM, and you probably are really stoked on that. Anyway, let's cultivate relationships, but not just once, right? We're going to do it year round, not just during campaigns. We're going to do it throughout the year so that we can engage people and meet them where they are. And that means sending impact stories that don't ask for anything, right? Like usually think, okay, I'm sending this out, I'm going to ask for money. I always tell folks, especially with campaigns or even outside campaigns, there's like an arc. There's like the education, soft ask and hard ask phases. And so you really want to tell people what's going on without always asking them for money, because then it becomes more of a relationship. If I showed up in your life every time and every time I saw you, I asked for money, it probably wouldn't feel very genuine, as opposed to if I'm just going over to hang out, like, let's kick it. Let me tell you about some of the cool stuff I've been doing in my life. Then when I ask you for money sometimes, maybe like, yeah, totally. Anyway, sharing stories from the field, creating moments of gratitude, and also letting donors know they belong, not just that they gave. And so what does that look like, though? Could be a quick video message from your executive director or program lead, a donor birthday or anniversary email. For those of you that don't know, like if I gave on this day and it's the same day next year, it's my donor anniversary or my donor birthday. So send me a little donor birthday card and say, thank you for being with us for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever that might be. Handwritten thank you card in June, just because, right? Like who doesn't like receiving a handwritten card in June? This mid-year kind of touch up, or a quarterly story roundup that lifts up the voices of the community and really gets them engaged in what's going on. What's really important through all this also is to understand that the touch points don't need to be fancy. They don't need to be super like, meh. Like Network for Good has a great tool. You can send video blasts out to folks, right? And I'll tell you what, both for acknowledgments and for notifications, I get so much more responses, so many more responses from video acknowledgments than from email acknowledgments. People will go out of their way and write me an email and say, thank you so much for sending me that email. It really meant a lot, or that video, it really meant a lot. So highly recommend to be thinking about, and this isn't like, it's not just like, boom, a quick right here. It's just a shot right here. Hey, thanks for your donation. And go a little bit more into detail, but you get what I'm saying. So let's use the opportunities that you already have instead of needing to create new ones like we talked about. We don't need to create a dozen new campaigns, but we really want to create a rhythm of the year and use that rhythm to build the relationships. So understanding like when you send your annual report, you can add a personal message from a board member, or during your program milestones that you send out, where you're giving updates about the programs, or you achieve something with a program. Invite them to behind the scenes with like photos of things that have happened or updates, community events, send the donors a recap. Maybe they didn't get to go, right? Maybe they didn't get to go, but they get to see all the amazing people that are there and all the stuff that you didn't hear one of the speakers. And then that gets them engaged. And also leading into holidays, to invite them to reflect on why they gave, and then ideally inspire them to give more. Um, each of the engagement opportunities that you have with folks is a way to say, I see you, you matter, and you're a part of the story. And that's why we really want to engage. Now, we've talked about automation, right? And so the question is, should you automate this? The short answer is yes and no with automation. And what does that mean? Yes, you should automate certain things like welcome emails, post donation thank yous, quarterly updates, birthday notes, and giving anniversaries. But you should also leave space for the unpredictable and the personal, right? So, like, if you have an automated series going out to someone and it's going to ask them for money, but you know something tragic just happened in their life, probably pause those automated emails and send a personal message to them, checking in to make sure that they're okay, or that things are happening, or that anything to do that organization can support. You can call the donor to share how their gift made a difference, which is a personal, contact that's like auditory and engaging, or sending a spontaneous thought of you message with a story that just happens to pop up. What's important to remember, all these remembering slides, right? I hope you're remembering. Automations should not be the floor, or should be the floor, but not the ceiling. Excuse me. So that means that they should be a foundation that you build stuff off of, but they shouldn't be a cover of everything that you're doing, and really working in the human touch points to be able to engage. And when we're thinking about those touch points, we want to really differentiate them and make it so that they're not all the same. What does that look like? How can we make it so that it doesn't all blend together? And so you can do alternate video formats, voice notes, postcards, live calls. You can switch up the sender. Like if I'm getting an email from me every time, I'm like, ugh, another message from Drew. But if I get a message from Ashley, I'd be like, huh, I wonder what Ashley's trying to tell me about from the organization. So clicking on that. Also sensory moments, like mailing them things, tactile, physical things, which is really nice. And then infusing the mission language into everything that you're doing, which is always super important. Making it feel human and not corporate is the ultimate goal, which we're trying to do. And most important is always tie it back to them, right? It's always donor-centric fundraising is what we're doing. It's all about the donor. So they help make this happen. The story exists because of them. We're grateful of this because of you, right? And those kinds of ideas. Some things to think about with relationships, and just as we're closing out the conversation about storytelling and transformational relationships, is the relationship always comes first, right? You want to lead with authenticity. You want to lead with curiosity. You want to lead with gratitude. And it requires attention, care, and engagement. And all of that will really uplift the experience that the donor has and uplift what they're going to do. Now, the last section that we're going to talk about, which is arguably one of the most important sections, is measuring and optimizing your fundraising. Because if you're not measuring, then you're guessing. And guessing is very difficult in the world of fundraising because we're dealing with people, and people are very unpredictable in certain circumstances. So what does that look like? We want to make sure we have depth. We want to make sure we have metrics that reflect that depth. And so we're talking about KPIs, or key performance indicators, for folks that are not hip to the jive fundraising lingo of acronyms. So what are key performance indicators? They are things that help you to track and understand what's going on so you can be smarter and more responsive in your decision making, and also understanding what's working but just as much what's not working so that you're not investing your time. So here are some of the most valuable and common KPIs that people track, just for your reference. So donor retention. So how many people gave last year that gave again this year? You want to get that number consistently up, 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 because that means you have consistency in what's going on. Also, it matters because it's way cheaper to retain a donor than to go out and get a new one. Because if you retain a donor, you already have that relationship. You can steward that and build it. If you have a new one, you got to go out and find it. You got to start all over again. So you want to keep those donors that you have, and you want to track the overall segments. You can do that as the whole segment of all your donors, and you can also break it up into new recurring major, however you break up your segments, so you can see what kind of donor retention you have for each one. There's also the donor lifetime value and what that looks like. So it averages the amount a donor gives over the entire time that they've supported you, and it helps you decide really how much energy you want to invest in retention and acquisition, developing that relationship, and figuring out like what your return is going to be on spending time engaging with that person. If I give you $5 once every 10 years, I'm probably not going to be the highest priority in what you're doing. But if I'm giving you regularly, but not super consistently, that may be an opportunity for you to grow. Here's an example of how you want to calculate that. It's really taking the average donor amount per gift, how often the donor gives, and then the donor lifespan of how long they've given to the organization. Here's a sample equation. So if they're giving an average of $100 twice a year, and they've donated 5 years in a row, then their lifetime value would be $1,000 so far to the organization. And so you can do that with your different accounts. You can also run reports that'll do this for you, and it'll calculate their lifetime giving. And that'll really help you to focus on who you want to be spending your time on. Another one is email engagement. So who's opening it, who's clicking it, and what's a conversion, right? Figuring out the actions people are taking with your emails. They only work if they're being read. So if they're not being opened, asking yourself why they're not being opened and how to increase your open rate, and also figuring out how you can maximize the efficiency of your time. We're talking about specific channel engagement also. So like how much return are you getting on the emails, the social media, and the SMS? Where are you investing your time? If no one's responding to your text messages, do you really want to keep sending text messages? Or maybe you should be focusing on emails because that's where your higher open rate is. So be thinking about that as well. Also, not just tracking the dollars as a pro tip, tracking the engagements. So it's not just how much money you're raising, but how many people are engaging with it as well. And you also want to be asking questions to kind of help to flush things out and turn them into insights, because you want to be able to reflect on the numbers and not just have them. Like if I collect all the data and don't do anything with it, it's really a waste. But if I'm looking at it, what surprised you? What's trending? Where are you putting a lot of energy and not getting results? And what are people most responding to? Because without data, I love this, without data, it's just noise without context. But with reflection, it's really powerful. You don't need a fancy dashboard. You can do it in 30 minutes on a spreadsheet. But if you're using Bonterra, you probably have a fancy dashboard. So you'll be able to make things happen and make it functional. And you can optimize things in real time. This means how can we be responsive to learn and grow as things happen with your team? You can do quarterly updates. You can review what you've learned, not just what you've earned. You can create test spaces where you're trying one new experiment every quarter to really diversify your activities. And you can involve other departments in what's going on. Always want to ask, what's one thing if we do differently based on what we've learned? Like what's one thing you can do differently that will increase or improve what you're doing? And ultimately, what matters most is tracking and engaging the number of people you're connecting with, optimizing how you're engaging, and transformations. Just because I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, I'll just close with this final reflection. Fundraising isn't about asking, it's about aligning. So how are you aligning your story with your values? How are you aligning your systems with your relationships? And how are you aligning your team with the vision that you have for change? So with that, questions.
Awesome. Drew, thank you so much. This has been incredibly informative. We already have some things coming into the chat. Yeah, this has been such an informative session. I'm sure folks are going to be able to take a lot of this great detail and great information back to their organizations and start implementing some different things and different tricks and trips. But before we do go into questions, folks, want to launch one last quick poll here. If you are interested in learning more about some of Bonterra's tools specifically and how we can kind of help you all, excuse me, track your data better, just create that momentum like we discussed in the beginning and keeping that momentum throughout the year, want to launch this quick poll, or if you just have questions about Bonterra in general and want those questions answered, please feel free to take a look at the poll, give your response, and then we will have one of our colleagues reach out to you after today's session. But with that, while folks are filling that out, want to kind of transition into the Q&A portion. We have a question that asks, what can I develop, I guess, as giveaways? If you have any insight on that, what can this person kind of use as giveaways for the different levels of their donors, specifically maybe corporate donors? Any insight you have for that, Drew?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to your organizational capacity, your funding, what's available to you. If you're an organization that's grassroots, and I would not say go out and invest in like a huge line of T-shirts and stuff just to send to corporate sponsors. Something as simple as your annual report, a drawing from one of your clients, or a story. If you make stuff, like for example, I work with farms that create like lavender lip balm and all these other kinds of things, or jam, right? Like people love, funders especially love jam. So for some reason, like give them a box of jam with a couple of things and they'll go crazy for that. So things that they can use ideally also, because especially if you're a corporation or a funder and you're like, or a donor, you're like, what am I going to do with this thing? Right. But something that they can actually use and work into their everyday life so that it's a constant reminder of what you're doing, a pen, a pin, a sticker, like, and it doesn't need to be grandiose. They're there supporting you and they're trying to make the impact. They're not doing it to get a gift. Now, if you have a membership system where you have those tiers and people get annual gifts, then you need to figure out what's realistic and would make it valuable. But then again, there are other organizations that have membership programs that don't offer gifts at all, because people are a member because they want to support the cause and they get invitations to events. So I know that wasn't specific. Hopefully some of those options make sense, but I wouldn't worry too much about sending a crazy package of things. Little things count, and a heartfelt message.
Absolutely. Good to know about the jam. I mean, I like jam too. Who doesn't like
Who
jam?
doesn't like jam?
Drew, we have a question from Annie. Annie asked, when you are a one-person fundraising team, and only part of your job is to do the fundraising, how do you prioritize what to do? What would you say to that? Which I think a lot of folks on the line can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, well, depends what your goals are. You know what I mean? Like, are you a new organization that has no database and no contacts to be able to do that? I'd say your number one mission is visibility and getting out into the community so you can build up that mailing list so that you can start to work those mailing list contacts into donors. Um, Acknowledgements, super key, right? So that's a priority no matter who you are or where you are in the organization. If someone makes a contribution, how 24 to 48 hours is usually the industry standard to say, hey, I saw your gift, thank you so much, here's some additional stuff. Or maybe if you have Bonterra, I would focus on setting up some automations, right? Because that'll save you some time to be able to free yourself up to do some of the other things that you're working on. But in addition to all of that, how are you activating your team? Because I know you're not the only person in the organization. And so, how are you leveraging volunteers? So, like, for example, communications, you don't need to make social media posts. That, a volunteer can make social media posts. All you got to do is tell them what to make the social media post about. How are you leveraging people that need to complete community service hours? Are you engaging educational facilities to be able to get those folks to come and engage? How diligent are you or what does your organization's volunteer system look like? So there's a lot of different questions there, and it really depends on where you are. But relationships are number one. So don't get lost in something over here when you have a pool of donors here that want to see and hear from you, because those are going to be your number one things. And get your executive out there to talk to folks. Come on, y'all. Leverage that team.
Absolutely, Drew. I like what you mentioned about tapping into maybe some like education resources with volunteer hours. I know a lot of high schools will require like their students to do volunteer hours. And even in college, some folks are looking for experience to add on to their resume. So volunteering helps. So, really great point on that. And we've had a lot of other speakers kind of talk about tapping into that. I'm not sure if all folks kind of know that that's a really great avenue to look into additional volunteer support. So, great
And
point there.
remember, volunteers are oftentimes the most likely to convert into donors because
Yeah,
they're already donating their time. So what's that extra step of donating $5? So the more volunteers you bring into the organization, the more of an audience you have and people that are committed to the organization. Plus, if you're using people that are willing to donate their time that are in schools, you could be training up your next staff member, right? Because they're
right.
going to fall in love with the organization and potentially come in. You already have them trained up and they know exactly what they're going to do. So there's a lot of great benefits to that.
Oh no, I think you went out for a second, Drew. We
Oh
didn't hear.
no.
Yeah, I don't think we got that last part. But like you said, I
Yeah,
think we got
they're
the
good.
general gist of yeah, you might be tapping into your next staff member with tapping into the education resources, getting them into the workforce, whether that be through volunteering or a paid position. But I think we lost you there, but glad to have you back. I have a couple more questions here. We have a question come in from Christy. Christy asked, "What are your thoughts on peer-to-peer fundraising, and how to engage the board around peer-to-peer fundraising, and kind of what's your take on that?"
110%. Yes, on peer-to-peer fundraising, it's probably one of the most effective ways to be able to engage your board because not only does it give them the ability to set their own fundraising goal, it can also create a fun-friendly competition with your board who's going to raise the most money, or maybe you get a little prize, you get a little gift card from a spa somewhere and say, hey, whoever raises the most gets this spa day. But it also allows you the opportunity to create those toolkits and resource packets for them so that then, if they're not tech savvy, you create the page for them, you give them materials, you tell them where to go, they go out to their community and fundraise. So they're very effective, they're very time effective, and they're really good for creating that culture of fundraising in the organization. The key is making it so your board's not afraid of it. Like if people are like, oh God, what am I going to do? How do I ask people? Which is totally natural and understandable. We want to be able to hold their hand through the process and make it as easy as possible. So highly recommend peer-to-peer giving.
Yeah, absolutely. We had another question come in from Dean. Dean asked, well, kind of following up on Annie's question earlier about being a one-person team, for a smaller organization trying to have like healthy and rich relationships with their donors, would you say that the approach should be to work on like some smaller changes that are like maybe more immediate that they can start working on, or would you say that, hey, let's do like a larger overhaul, so to speak, of the boots on the ground work and then launching kind of like a new CRM? Or is it better to, like I said, do that smaller work on like outreach? I think I understand Dean's question, and let me know if I
Yeah,
need
I
to.
think it's a both and on that one because you want to evaluate what you're doing first. Like that's the number one thing. So oftentimes when I'm working with clients for the first time, the first session is really, what are you doing? What's working? What's your fundraising goal? Dean, do you know what your fundraising goal is for the year? Because if you don't, you got to figure that out. What, how are you engaging folks? How big's your team? How big's your donor list? What kind of donors do you have? So getting an idea of what's going on there, but then looking at the tool that you're using also, because if you're doing all this on a spreadsheet, let me tell you, it's going to get real complicated with tracking everything. So if you don't have a CRM right now that you're working with, I would recommend getting one and making shifts within the organization, both on the board level of board engagement, setting up that committee so that people are talking about it in between board meetings, figuring out ways that you can maximize and impact your multi-channel outreach. So doing all those little things and doing the culture shifts while you're maybe on the back end over here analyzing everything and saying like, okay, what are our steps that we need to do? What's your fundraising plan for the year? Right? Like, what do you do in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 to raise money? Do you have a calendar? Maybe you don't. If you don't, that's okay. But it's something to acknowledge that you don't have that tool that you can point to and say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is who's responsible for this. And this is how much it's going to cost us with how much we're trying to raise this year. Yeah, I'd say I'd say it's a both and also get yourself a fundraising coach because we can help you walk through that whole process together. But while you're doing the evaluation, I want to emphasize this. And as you're coming up with your fundraising plan, involve as many people in the organization as possible. Don't do it yourself because there's nothing worse than doing all this great work and giving a plan to people and not have them do it. It's much more statistically possible or realistic that if people come up with the ideas with you and feel like there's a sense of their spirit in that plan, then they will execute it with you much more readily and much more willingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for kind of adding that context. Want to make sure I had it right, but perfect. It looks like we have another question, and I think we might have time for this last one. Justice asked, as a grassroots organization who works with low to middle income populations, how do we fundraise while being mindful to the communities that they work with and that they serve?
Yes. So this is I appreciate the intention and the awareness in that question, Justice, because uh, there's a lot of ways you can do fundraising wrong, especially in communities where we're working with frontline or you're a frontline organization working with directly affected communities, some of whom may be socioeconomically disadvantaged, and so sometimes it might feel weird or uncomfortable asking them for money. And I would say there's two things here. One is you're going to be looking for money outside of that community because the idea is to bring people in from outside the community to support the community. Additionally, you don't want to assume, because assuming, it's saying if you assume you make a out of you and me, um, you really want to not prejudge people for what they're able to do. Statistically, people of lower means give higher percentages to um, charity and community-based things than people of greater affluence. Like if you look at the percentage of their income to how much they donate. So we don't want to discount them. We always want to give them the opportunity, even if it's $5, right? Like, hey, you want to become a $5 a month donor? That's fantastic. If you can do it, that's great. If you can't, no shade. Come over and work with us as a volunteer if you want to, or help us fundraise, or collect their story about how they're doing it. Use confidentiality to respect their privacy if they don't want to be doxxed and publicized out there. But use a pseudonym, ask if you can tell their story as a way that your organization is supporting the community. Then they're having a direct role in the fundraising without having to be asking for money themselves or without having to give money. And we're not talking about I don't know what language is appropriate on here, but there's like trauma, the keyword. And so we want to avoid that. We want to avoid just like, oh, look at the doom and gloom, starving children everywhere and stuff like that. We want to focus on the impact and the uh, power that exists within that community. Because I always, there's this conversation of do we say that we help empower communities? No. For me, no. We don't empower communities because communities have all the power they need right now. What we're doing is helping provide the resources and skills or even just technical support to have them realize their power and then move on that. So uh, being able to emphasize that element of look at how powerful this community is because of the support of people, or not even because of the support. So you get to catch yourselves in that language. This community is incredibly powerful and it can reach a new level because of the support that you're going to provide to help us get this new building that's going to provide these additional resources for them. So be thinking about it that way. Hopefully it answered the question. But I appreciate you and what you're doing because obviously you're doing it with a big heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for answering that, Drew. And thank you for asking the question, folks. But I know we're at time here. I want to thank you, Drew, again so much for your time this afternoon. This was a great presentation. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the chat, but all the thanks were rolling through. I'm sure folks
Oh, wow. Look
feel,
at that.
yeah, lots of it in the chat. They are invigorated. They are ready to go. And folks on the line, thank you. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention to Drew in this presentation.